I'm Hashim. Today I would like to explain about the novel The Invisible Man from chapter 1 to chapter 6. The first chapter is The Strange Man's Arrival. In this chapter, a strange man named Griffin arrived in a village in Epping and he checked into the Coach and Horses Inn in the same village. The innkeeper, Mrs. Hall, is delighted to have a guest during the off season and makes a great effort to make him feel welcome, and she served him meal and returned to his room to deliver a forgotten item. She was shocked to see his by appearance because his head was bandaged and his neck was covered with a muffler. Most of his body parts cannot be seen. So she thought Mrs. Hall assumed that the new lodger has an accident or an operation. So she tries to draw him out and get him to disclose about what happened to him. But he wouldn't talk about it and he made it clear that he doesn't want to have a conversation between both of them. And then Mr. Holmes leaves the place peacefully. In this plot, the narrator portrayed both the characters of Griffin and the Mrs. Hall. In one hand, Griffin, who lacks of interpersonal skills and also the empathy, and he also was rude behavior shown among others. On the other hand, Mrs. Hall, who is tolerant and accepting of Griffin's strange behavior and thinks of him as a poor soul. Yet she has a fleeting thought that his unusual appearance is abnormal also. When she first sees him in the parlor with his coat and hat off, she thinks he looks more like a divine helmet than a human man. And also, it shows that Griffin has no interest in other people, even so much to avoid polite, friendly chatter with the innkeeper he just met. And also, in this book, it shows the themes of invisibility by showing the weird dressing appearance of the Griffin and the weird behavior of the Griffin. The second chapter is Mr. Teddy Henry's first impressions. After the darkness falls, Mrs. Hall uses the arrival of Teddy Henry, a clock jobber, and as an excuse to knock on the parlor door to see if Griffin wants tea. When they enter, Griffin was sleeping. When he awakens, Griffin asks Miss Hall he would like to be alone and undisturbed. But he agrees to let Henry to mend the clock. First thought, he repeats his request to have his luggage picked up and delivered that night. Miss Hall tells him it is not possible, which disappoints him. And Griffin tells him that he was an experimental investigator. His luggage contains ex, contains equipment for his work. He does not like to be disturbed when he is working. And he had an accident that left his weak and sensitive. Henry tries to engage Griffin in conversation, but Griffin cut him off after two words, saying, "Finish and go." And Henry leaves quickly. Then, at Gleason's corner, another inn, he runs into Mrs. Hall, who is to be the husband of Mrs. Hall. And after he met Mr. Hall, Henry tells Mr. Hall the new guest about new guest, suggesting that who they don't know the name and is in disguise and hiding from the police. After Mr. Hall went to the inn, he goes to the parlor to investigate the new guest. Griffin has returned to his room, but Hall examines a paper with the mathematical computation left behind. Annoyed by her husband's not to meddle in her business in the middle of the night, said Mrs. Hall. In this plot, it shows that Henry plants the first seeds of suspicions of the stranger among the villagers and Mr. Hall. But Mrs. Hall remains in Griffin's corner, but her husband and Henry clearly are not. However, there are also chances that Mrs. Hall also doubt that Griffin have like some cause of some strange behavior showing. So also he thinks that it might be some other reasons. The third chapter is The 1001 Bottles. In this chapter, the mail carrier, Fahrenheit, brings Griffin's luggage to the inn, and Griffin goes outside to oversee the delivery, and his dog bites Griffin. Tearing his glove and trousers, Griffin goes to the room to change. When Mr. Hall checks on Griffin, he sees something that seems like a handless arm waving towards him, and a face with odd spots. Suddenly, something strikes Mr. Hall in the chest and then forcefully pushes him out of the room. Giving him a concussion, he wonders what it had he just seen. Unable to find words to describe his impressions, Mr. Hall rejoins the group without telling anyone about what happened. Griffin reappears and oversees the delivery of his crates into the parlor. He unpacks each crate and takes the test tubes and the scale and bottles along with him. And he immediately starts working without even cleaning up the packing straw he has carelessly thrown on the floor. Deeply absorbed in his work, Griffin does not initially hear Mrs. Hall when she delivers his dinner. She sees him with his glass off and thinks his eye stalks were extraordinarily hollow. Griffin spends the whole afternoon working in the parlor with the door closed. He works mostly in silence, but sometimes at one point he makes noises and breaks the glasses because he might be angry and Miss Hall is suspicious about it. And also when Fahrenheit and Henry meet up, Henry told Fahrenheit told Henry that the when the dog ripped his trousers and they were black, he declares that the man is probably a kind of half-breed. In this chapter, it mostly shows the theme of invisibility, as like it is more apparent that when Mr. Hall also see that a handless arm, and when he saw that he was like speechless and he doesn't understand the theory. And when the invisibility was first relieved for the first time in this chapter to the Mr. Hall, it also defined the unknown or adjust to new knowledge about people. The narrator notes it happened so rapid that it gave him no time to observe. The reality is, even if Mr. Hall had an ample time to observe, he would not have been able to interpret what he had seen. Chapter 4 is Mr. Cuss interviews the stranger. During the next 3 months, Griffin settles into the inn and works most of his time. He has no visitors, he rarely leaves the inn at the night time. And when he went to the village for a walk or for food, the people make fun of him, call him boogeyman, and also children also make fun of him, boogeyman, when Griffin appears. Cuss visits Griffin under the pretense of asking for a donation of the nest fund. The two men meet in the parlor and talk for about 10 minutes. Griffin reveals something of perception. He explained he has a valuable prescription and lost it. His search is related to this lost prescription and he expresses frustration about it, saying it was a damnable long research. When he discloses this information, Griffin is irritated when Cuss pushes for additional disclosure. Cuss then rushes out of the inn. His face was white, his eyes started over his head. He meets up with the vicar, Mr. Bunting, and relates the event of his visit. Cuss says that Griffin has been explaining how he had lost a valuable prescription, and Cuss noticed Griffin's sleeve was empty and he had no hand. Assuming Griffin had a coke arm, Cuss had asked, "How the devil can you move an empty sleeve like that?" Griffin replied by taunting Cuss, "It's an empty sleeve, is it?" Then Griffin approached Cuss with his non-existent hand and pinched Cuss on his nose with what Cuss says felt like fingering and a thumb. For all his attempts to hide his invisibility with a scarf, turned-up collar, and other items, Griffin was now incensed by Cuss' belief he had an empty sleeve, that he revealed that he did have hand and arm, even though Cuss could not see them and did not know what to make of the touch. The frightened Cuss hit Griffin's cuff and ran out of the inn. In this plot, Griffin connects with a villager for the first time. He converses with Cuss, another man of science, and reveals something of personal significance related to a prescription. Griffin also makes a physical contact with another patient for the first time, demonstrating that his body exists even though it cannot be seen. He challenges Cuss' prescription that he has an empty sleeve, saying, "You said it was an empty sleeve." And this brings that the Griffin's connections with the villagers are getting quite well between Gus and Griffin. Next is Chapter 5, The Burglary at the Vicarage. A burglary occurs at the vicarage. Mrs. Bunting awakens before dawn when he heard somebody moving inside his house, and they went to see downstairs, where they find a burning candle and an open drawer in the study. When they hear the chink of money, Mr. Bunting grabs a poker and rushes into the room. Neither sees an intruder, and they search the room for one without success. Unable to accept they had imagined the noises, they list evidence someone had been in the room. A burning candle, an open drawer, and money removed from it, which means the money was stolen. And suddenly, a sound of sneeze came from another direction, which redirects their search. They chase after the noise only to hear the kitchen door slam. They see the back door open and shut further. Proof someone had been in their house and just left it. In this plot, it mostly explains the misuses of the scientific invisibility, which is like he is stealing from another person. I mean, Griffin is stealing from Vicarage because he can't be seen and no one knows. But unfortunately, the, uh, there there rise the suspicions between them and the Griffin. And that's for all. Thank you.